Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Rubrik. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but first we have a few housekeeping notes to address. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to share it with a friend afterwards, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude the webinar today. If you have any questions for our speakers today, we want you to go ahead and direct those to the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of the screen. And if you'd like to engage with your fellow audience members or just let us know where you're calling in from, we want you to use the chat tab for that. The slides for today's presentation can be downloaded if you expand the Handouts tab, which is also on the right side of your screen. And finally, at the conclusion of our webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So on to our topic today. It is how secure backups and analytics can help you recover from ransomware in hours. And I'm joined today by Yara Rules, Senior Developer Advocate and Microsoft Azure MVP at Rubrik, and Mike Preston, Senior Developer Advocate at Rubrik. It's my pleasure at this point in time to turn the floor over to Yara to get us started. Yara and Mike, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much. So my name is Yara Rules. I'm a colleague of Mike, and I'm a senior developer advocate at Rubrik. And what I spend a lot of my time on is building out use cases, working on the SDKs, and trying to figure out how to find new and innovative ways of combining API calls to automate all mundane tasks away. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Yap. Yeah, so I'm Mike Preston. I'm also a senior developer advocate at Rubrik, do a lot of the stuff that Yap does as well. And I'm going to kick it off for us today. So just sort of like an agenda of what we're going to go through. Number one, we're going to go through some slides. I'm going to try and go through them relatively quick because, we all get bored. But I really want to talk about the need for secure backup. Like, why are we even talking about backup, in terms of security, right? Why do we need to have security? Why does backup and security work together? And sort of baseline what Rubrik is and how we can help. Then we're going to be mostly demos, right? I have a demo, Yap has a demo, and then we'll finally just wrap up. So to kind of kick it off, like when we talk about the need for secure backups, the issue really comes is like we're generating an enormous amount of data these days, right? We have data coming from our data center, from cloud, from SaaS apps. And essentially, our backup systems are really a system of record for this data. And the problem is right now, a lot of the times our backup systems are legacy backup systems. And, we run into some issues when we have legacy backup systems being that system of record. And I just kind of want to show why that's an issue. So we've all invested heavily in IT security, right, with the rise of ransomware and all of that. But despite this, hackers are still successfully getting in and penetrating our defenses and they're targeting our data. And the problem is they're also targeting backup data now as well. So they're encrypting our production networks, and then they're going ahead and they're targeting the backup data as well, because that, increases their chances of you going ahead and paying the ransom. So really with this, if our backup data is exposed, if it is able to be affected by ransomware, if it is compromised, there's serious business consequences there. We have the cost of downtime, the cost of paying the ransom, and all that fun stuff. So with Rubrik, we solve this problem by taking the data protection and the data security and converging that into a single platform. So even when our security defenses fail, the data that sits on Rubrik is still protected. And we call this security at the point of data. That's our marketing term for it. But essentially, we could secure your backup data against an attack. So your backups will always be there for what they were initially intended for, which is our last line of defense. So to lay out sort of how we do this, we kind of break Rubrik down into 3 main components. So at the core, we have our automated data management. And essentially, this is our core product that we came out with. This is driven by policies. And I'll go deeper into that. But essentially, you take all of those data protection constructs that you've done for quite some time, like your RPO, your retention, how long you're going to keep this stuff on premises before you archive it off to maybe cheaper storage located up in the cloud. You take all of this and you bundle that into a policy, and then you just simply start applying these policies to your workloads. And then Rubrik just going out and backing up and making sure that all your workloads are adhering to these policies. From there, the data lands on Rubrik. It hits a custom-built file system that we have. It's called Atlas, which is basically immutable. So it's an append-only file system. So when a backups comes in, we're only copying, number one, those incremental changes, but we're copying them to other portions of the file system. So we're never, once a backup lands on Rubrik, it can never be changed. So it's never going to be encrypted by ransomware. Inside of that as well, and we're going to talk a bit about it today, is our API first design. So every single thing that you're going to see us go through in the demo, that you'll see me go through in the demo today, you'll be able to accomplish as well by calling an underlying API. So and we're customer zero for that. Essentially, our UI basically calls underlying APIs. That's a pretty standard construct in today's world, but it's super important because it allows you to essentially build and automate and integrate your own solutions into Rubrik. So outside of that core, the automated data management, we have another couple of different layers, if you will. So there's certainly cloud. We definitely provide integration into cloud. So like I mentioned earlier, we can archive off to cloud. That's built right into the product. It's been there since day one. So maybe, after X amount of days, maybe after 30 days worth of backups, as much as we would love to sell you more Rubrik capacity to store backups on, you're probably going to want to archive off those older backups that you're not going to use and move them up into the cloud. We can also take that archive data, convert it, and spin it up within the cloud. So once it's archived up there, we can, go ahead and spin an EC2 instance from that. And then we also protect your cloud native instances as well. So your EC2 instances or your Azure VMs, Office 365 is another very, very big one that we're running into now. And then the top layer that we have here is sort of the security aspect. And this is the layer that everybody's excited about right now. And it sort of starts off, and I'll go into each of these in a little more detail, but essentially, if you look at the screen, you can follow the path basically from our zero trust data protection. That's our immutability, multi-factor authentication, to be able to lock SLAs and ensure, that a rogue admin can't go in and essentially decrease your retention. So backups get deleted. So all that stuff's protected. From there, when you do get hit by ransomware, if you do get hit by ransomware, hopefully you don't, we provide an investigation service that utilizes the backup data to detect anomalies and predict, whether or not ransomware is hit within your environment. The next step of that would be using sensitive data discovery to, again, use that backup data for more than just simple recovery, but we can search in what data you have and where. So think if you need to be PCI compliant or something like that, we can dive in and actually see, what exactly is within that data. We then have our newest sort of addition to that, which is incident containment or threat hunting. So we're able to comb through all of those backups and use things like Yara rules or file hashes to detect malware sitting within your backups. So before you go over to restore something, you can ensure that, we're not just restoring something that's just going to reinfect our environments again. And then, of course, is the application recovery. And this comes in a few different flavors. We have our standard recovery methods where we do what we call is instant restore. So essentially Rubrik becomes the storage for your environment, and it's the underlying storage, and we just map, say, your virtual machines and VMware are actually using Rubrik as a data store, and we can recover basically as fast as that OS can essentially boot. And then on top of that, we have our orchestrated application recovery, which is basically a DR play where you can build blueprints and test failovers, add multiple VMs, set boot orders, network readdressing, things like that. So to go a bit deeper into that core layer, because it's important to understand, We have that modern data protection. We completely replace your legacy architecture. If you need to scale up, you need more capacity, you just simply add more Rubrik nodes or add more, pieces of Rubrik software into your environment. Again, that SLA policy engine is key. You basically create one SLA domain, which, well, you can create as many as you want, but essentially one SLA domain that handles, say, how often do I want to back up? How long do I want to keep those backups? How long do I want to keep those? Do I want to age these off? So after 30 days, do I want to copy these up to cloud? And then we have replication in there as well, which is sort of a disaster recovery type of play where it's kind of like archiving, except the opposite. So with archiving, we keep 30 days of local backups, then we archive to the cloud. With replication, maybe we want to take, the most 5 recent backups from the chain, and we want to replicate them to another Rubrik cluster at another location. So we have that recent data somewhere else in the event that we need to recover. And again, that API first design, and our instant, live mount, instant recovery. We have a number of other different recovery methods as well, such as in-place recovery, where only changed blocks get copied back to the original VM. We have the ability to export the VMs or databases or your workloads to another location. So copy the data off of the Rubrik platform, sort of a more traditional type of recovery. So to dig into the top layer, it starts with our zero trust data protection. And this is really what drives ransomware investigation and everything. The way that we can ensure that, once your data lands on that Rubrik platform, it can never be changed, right? So that's kind of the main driver behind why we can provide, or why, we've helped so many organizations recover from ransomware. Your backups will always be there when you need them. And then on top of that, it's that sort of defense in depth approach, right? We're kind of logically air gapped from the rest of your network. So the backups aren't directly accessible over the network through those standard protocols like NFS and things like that, right? It all has to flow through sort of the Rubrik UI. It all has to be authorized, again, multi-factor authentication and all of that. And that's included, not just externally into Rubrik, but even internally as the Rubrik nodes talk and connect to each other. Each request needs to be authenticated and authorized. From there, we have our ransomware investigation. And this is pretty neat. What it does is essentially takes, maybe 2 different backups and compares the 2, right? And what it does is it generates a differential or a delta between the 2, saying, this is what's changed. These are the files that have changed. And the metadata around that gets sent up and run through, sent up to Rubrik and run through a couple of different machine learning algorithms. So the first one detects anomalies, so it looks at, how many files have been created or deleted or modified, what types of files they are, like, are they mainly Office files, different things like that. There's a number of different factors that go into that machine learning algorithm and the machine learning model. And in the end, it can basically say, is this an anomaly or not, right? And if there is anomalies, it in turn goes through another machine learning algorithm, which determines whether or not it thinks ransomware was the culprit of that, right? So we do encryption scans and a bunch of different things. We've trained the models, with, air-gapped, sandbox, actual real ransomware, as well as simulated attacks as well. So what it does is really give you the ability to determine a blast radius. So when you're first hit by ransomware, how quick can you figure out, what all was affected? How many different workloads? What about the files on that workload, right? All of that stuff. It allows you to very, very quickly determine this information. From there, the next logical question is, okay, all of this was affected, but, what was it, right? Do we know what's in all our files? Of course we don't, right? And we always see surprises pop up. I worked in operations for years, and I've seen, different sensitive pieces of information that you stumble upon thinking, why is that sitting on this virtual machine, or why is that sitting on this workload? So the next sort of logical question is our sensitive data discovery. So what it does is, again, scans that backup data. We have over 6 analyzers, so like PCI and HIPAA, and different things like that. And essentially you can, create your own as well if you're fancy at, good at regex and fancy at all, or dictionaries as well. So you can create your own, have it scan for that, and Rubrik will go ahead and report back on, this piece of data is sensitive in nature. Here's its classification. And then furthermore, as we'll see in the demo, you can see what users actually had access to that data. And from there, we sort of assess, we create a risk score. So if, a file contains sensitive information and it is wide open to everybody in your environment, then you're going to get a very high risk. So the next step before we go ahead and we, restore is going to be that threat hunting. So the ability to go in and take a look at everything and, discover and take a look at different pieces. Is there any malware lying in there? Do we have a bunch of Yara rules we could copy and paste? We're looking for, specific definitions of things. And, we can go ahead and identify that and make sure that we restore the last known clean copy. So basically everything leading up to here, we determine the blast radius. We determine whether or not we have sensitive data. We determine whether, our last known clean copy of our data, and then we go ahead and the next step is to recover. And like I mentioned, we have a lot of different recoveries methods. The one highlighted here is our disaster recovery scenario where, essentially create a blueprint. Maybe it's 1, 2, 3, maybe it's 50 different, workloads. Set up what boot order you want them to come up in, set up the pre and post scripts that you want to run to ensure they're functional, and then go ahead and automate and orchestrate the failover of that. So maybe for testing you want to readdress to a certain subnet, or you want to add to a certain network. That's completely different from your failover, where you can define a different network for failover or a different subnet space, different pre and post scripts, all of that fun stuff. So with that, I'm just going to kind of jump into a process or a demo of sort of a complete end-to-end of what I just showed you guys on how we can, really recover from a ransomware attack with Rubrik. So let me just get this. We'll start here. This is our sort of global dashboard for Rubrik. So number one, this is provided as a SaaS application. Obviously, for workloads residing in your data center, will deploy like an on-premises version of the Rubrik software, but it all reports back up to the SaaS application. Where this is sort of the overall look at everything. We can see all of the different workloads and objects we're protecting. We can see where we have different clusters throughout the world, as well as, all of our cloud workloads, our SaaS workloads, and obviously our data center workloads here. So here within our ransomware investigation, we could see that we do have 3 anomaly events. So right away when we log in, we could say, oh, something's happening here, right? So we can click investigate on this. And right away, we see a number of different objects that have been affected. If we look, this icon's a little bit different than the others. These are individual virtual machines at the moment. This icon here just represents that, hey, these 2 workloads are a member of our orchestrated application recovery blueprint. So it shows up a bit differently. So if we drill in here, and I should mention our supported, objects at the moment right now are vSphere virtual machines, your physical Linux and Windows, as well as NAS file sets. The roadmap does have support for, pretty much every other one of our protected workloads coming, in the future as well to be able to be supported here. So right away, we could see the workloads that have generated anomalies. This is in the past 30 days. If we drill into, say, this file server here, we can drill right in and go right through the actual folder structure to, discover what exactly has been affected, right? So we could see this file share has a ton of different files which have been marked suspicious or deleted. Again, we could add filters here. If we only want to see suspicious and deleted files, we could do that and drill right down to the actual files. So this is what I mean by determining the blast radius, and we could do this in a really fast way. So, if it's a small attack and you just need to recover right now, you could obviously we could select here and select to do a file level recovery. A few different options. We can download them to our workstation. This is handy in the event of a ransomware attack if the the CISO or the CEO calls and says, hey, I can't access this. I need access to these files immediately before you even think about recovering. So different things like that. We could download them and send them off. Obviously, we can send them right back to the original location, or then we have export as well, which is really handy if you want to, reconstruct the data somewhere else, maybe in a clean room for your security team to go ahead and further triage and different things like that. So that's file level. On a complete image level, we get the same sort of options, just a few different things. So there's live mount, which can be done, at the complete, image level or the disk level. It'll go ahead and create a new virtual machine in your environment, which maps to that point in time. And then Rubrik acts as the underlying data store. So you can get back up and running really, really fast with this. And then you can go ahead and storage vMotion or, migrate that off of the Rubrik platform at a time that you see fit. So maybe you want to grant your users access to this immediately. It's a mission critical application. You're losing money. You can go ahead and restore it this way and then move it back to your production storage whenever it's available again. Instant recovery does the same thing. However, live mount doesn't touch the original VM. Instant recovery will go ahead and power that off, deprecate it, mark it as, this is no good anymore, and recover the new VM with the same name and everything. Export, that's where we can take, the data from the Rubrik platform, go ahead and ship it off to its original location or another location if you want. Again, very handy if you want to take like a SQL server and a web server or an app server, like a typical 3-tier app, restore that into an isolated environment for your security team to run tests on and do things. We have customers that, restore into isolated environments to do things like testing upgrades or, patch tests, penetration testing as well. So there's lots of different use cases to restore these point in times. And then obviously we have in-place recovery, which basically, again, copies only those change blocks, copies them back to the original location, and it basically rewinds your application to a certain point in time. So we're not going to restore as of yet because there's still some information we want to do. So this is essentially our ransomware investigation. This is identifying that blast radius. Our next logical step is going to be, was any of this suspicious in nature, right? And we can quickly jump over to our sensitive data discovery service here and have a look. So let me just back out here and find, there's lots in the legal department. So, we can quickly look at the same workload and see, all of the different hits that have been identified as having sensitive information. So we could see the classifications over here. This one's certainly a lot of US financials and PCI, things like that. We could see which files were hit with that. We could quickly download a CSV if we want to. So maybe you want to send that off to your legal team so they can follow up. And as well, with the users, we could go ahead and see what groups and users have access to this. And definitely depending on, whether or not it's sensitive in nature, who has access, this risk score will get updated respectively. Again, this can also be helpful in, recovering from ransomware because through, compromised Active Directory accounts. So a lot of times you might see the owner change, if we're in a legal department and we see the owner set as, the receptionist's username, then we might want to go, make sure that Active Directory account hasn't been compromised, things like that. As I mentioned, we have a ton of different classifications built in and analyzers. We're always coming out with new ones. And if you wanted to add your own, it's just a matter of, figuring out the regular expression, putting it in there, you go ahead and add it. And then we just basically assign these. We assign the analyzers to a policy. A policy can have more than one analyzer. And then we just assign it to our objects, which is going to be our virtual machines or, our physical Windows and Linux, and it goes ahead and executes that scan for us. So at this point,
quick question from the audience, Mike. We got a question if our data is also secured by multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. So both the on-premises version of the software and the SaaS-based is by default set up to have multi-factor authentication enabled. And this is a big push from us out to our customers as well. We're a very big proprietor of MFA. We also have time-based one-time passwords and a whole bunch of other stuff as well that we utilize. So absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
No problem. So basically, we've got the blast radius. We've identified our sensitive data. That next sort of step was the threat hunting. And this is new. This is in beta right now. It should be out soon. Essentially, this is our ability to go ahead and run, and I don't think I can actually see, but I could start a new one here. Basically set up Yara Rules. So if you're familiar with Yara Rules, it's sort of a rule-based language that can help you find indicators of compromise. So it scans through the files and the file contents. You can also scan by file hashes as well as patterns. And you can go ahead and copy these from, I think the NSA, GitHub has a whole slew of them. They're widely used. You go ahead, you copy them into here, and then basically assign them to, actually, if I can get to that section here, let me just do a file hash because that's easy to play around with. We basically go through and just assign them to our workloads, right? So maybe I want to scan this virtual machine. Well, not this one because it's not protected. Let's go ahead and we'll scan and then we can say, scan the most recent snapshot, or maybe take a custom time range. So if we were hit by ransomware, you might want to scan from, 3 days ago to now to see when it actually showed up, to make sure we're not just restoring, that back into production and you risk the chance of being reinfected. So with that, the last sort of thing to talk about is our recovery. So we went through sort of the individual recovery, but for the blueprint recoveries, actually it might be easier to jump over to our blueprint and show the actual blueprint. So this is a predefined blueprint that we have. And as you can see, it contains some virtual machines, has a boot order. If we jump into details here, we have a number of things that we need to define. So, where are we going to fail these over to? What, in this case, it's VM. So what ESXi hosts are we going to fail these over to? Where do we want to store them? Do we want to do anything crazy with the networking, like readdress these? Do we want to keep them on DHCP? And then again, that's split out between the actual failover and the test failover. And probably just as important is, post failover, how are we going to reprotect these, right? Because a lot of times, we'll fail over and the failover works great. And then next thing you know, 3 days later, you're going to, to restore a backup and you're like, oh, we didn't reprotect that after we performed our DR. So, and then of course there's failback as well. So that gets set up ahead of time, preferably. And then we could just come in here to our ransomware investigation, select our blueprint and click recover. And, we go ahead and we select, the certain snapshot time. When do we want to restore to? Let's just bring it back to say there. And basically confirm we're going to do this, type blueprint and go ahead and click recover. And the orchestrated application recovery will go ahead and do everything and process that failover for us. I'm not going to actually do that because it takes quite a while and it's basically assuming there's a disaster happening in the production. So with that, that's what I had for the demo today. If anyone wants to see anything else, I'm going to let Yop go now because I've been talking for a while, but if anyone wants to see anything else, definitely throw it in the chat or in the Q&A. We have until looks like 4 o'clock. So we have some time if we want to dive into anything further. So I'll pass it off to Yop at this moment.
Thank you, Mike. All right. There we go. And I don't have a whole lot of slides, so for me it's going to be jumping right into the demo. So let's get started with that. So the first thing that you need to know when working with Rubrik, as Mike also mentioned, is that everything we do is fully API based, and that brings some advantages along compared to more traditional products. What that allows us to do is, because all the API calls are available and the product is designed from the ground up, it becomes easy to utilize that in any kind of scripting or programming language. And in order to facilitate that, what we've done is we started build.rubrik.com, and on this we cater to a broad audience. So it doesn't matter if you're an end user or you're a hardcore API developer, whatever your skill level is or whatever what kind of software you're looking for, it's available here. So if you look on the left here, we see that we have the software development kits. They're basically modules that can be imported in Golang or PowerShell, Python, for example. Then we also have tooling integrations. Those are usually built on top of our SDKs, and they can be used if you want to use Terraform to deploy and manage your Rubrik instances. And then we also have use cases. So that can be anything from a chatbot to what we call Roxy, which is our intelligent assistant. Which allows you to build the API calls just by talking to your instance. Other things we have available here is also for, I'm going to dive into the module I'm most familiar with, the PowerShell module. We also have quick starts available. So if you want to know how you can hit the ground running, how you can get started with it, you can jump here. You see installation notes, different ways of installation, authentication, and just a number of code samples to get you started. If SDKs are not your thing, then we also have the REST API documentation. We have a GraphQL playground. The playground is available for both. It works both with our SaaS offering as well as on premises, so you can choose what to connect to. And if you take a look at the API documentation, and I'll open up one of the API specs, we can see all the API calls that are possible. But if you're not a developer and you just want to use the product and you have zero scripting experience, even that is not a problem, because I'm going to log on to my on-premises instance now. We'll do sign in. And we can now see that I'm logged in. So just via the GUI, I'm using Google Chrome. And let's see. I'll open up the developer view. And what we can see here, if we go to the network request, if I click summary, for example, we were already there. So we can see a number of API calls being fired off. And I'll jump a bit further. I'll clean this one up. I'll go into virtual machines, and let's check out what kind of vSphere VMs we have. Then we can see that there's a number of API calls here. And in my case, I'm going to look for my own VM, which we just found here. And I'll tap on this one. And what we can see is that we have an API call here for my virtual machine. But if you're not familiar with any kind of scripting or programming, what developer mode allows you to do is if you right-click this, we can either replay it, but we can also choose to copy it. And when we copy it, we can choose how we want to copy this. And what this will do is we'll get the entire request, either get as Node.js, curl, or even PowerShell. So for this example, I'll go for curl. And I'll open that one up in my editor. And what we can see here is we have a complete curl query. And if I run this, and it behaves well, then you'll be able to see the same kind of information that we just saw in the web interface. So I'll execute it now, and we can see you get all the information back about my VM. Obviously, this is not formatted. If you want to do something useful with it, you could either write it to a file or process it with a utility like JQ. So we'll get structured data, because everything that's returned by our API endpoints is all JSON. So it's pretty easy to work with. So now we went from just clicking around in a browser, and we already have an API call that we can use with zero scripting. So the bar is really low if you want to get started automating anything, because you could just go into your browser, you can take a look at what, click around, do a number of actions, and afterwards just copy all those API calls, can put this in a shell script, and the next time you need to do it, you can just run the script and you do exactly what you just did in the browser. So there's actually two options here. So what I did was I copied just the command that I had selected, but it's also possible to copy every command that we've just recorded. So that is all those API calls. Depends what your goal is, but we make it very easy to automate these things, because we also consume our own APIs. Everything that our product does is all based on API calls. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at how we can get started if we use the PowerShell module, for example. So I'll switch over to my editor. And we're going to take a look at some of the commands here. So first things first, let's take a look if we have the module installed. So we run get module Rubrik and list all available versions. You can see that I currently have two versions installed, the latest and the second latest. And let's take a look at how many commands we have available. So we can use the get command commandlet for that. So we can see there's a lot of commands here, and we can use measure to just get a count to get a better idea of how many commands we have here. So let's execute that, and we can see that the current count is on 215. Every time I run this, it's also new for me, because there's always new commands in. Our SDKs and our integrations are all open source and available on GitHub. So sometimes community members just add new functionality in there, and I might not even be aware of that. So we can also use get command to see what kind of commands we have available. So you can see if I look for Rubrik *VM, you can see that there's a lot of commands available to get information about VMs, but also snapshots, clusters, data centers, all different kind of objects. So if we run get Rubrik VM, we can see we get some response. Let's disconnect from the cluster. And now if I run it after disconnecting, we can see we need to be connected to at least one Rubrik cluster. And it mentions at least because we can be connected to as many clusters as we want. And we can also execute commands against multiple servers at a time, because all the different connections are stored in an array, and we can just cycle through that and be able to automate commands against multiple clusters at the same time. Well, depending if you do it parallel or one by one. So let's connect to the cluster, and we do that by specifying the FQDN. And for the credential, I've stored my credentials locally. So we'll just import those so I don't have to supply those. Then there's also no chance of me accidentally entering my password into Notepad, which I done before during a presentation, and then I need to change my password again. Or probably Mike has to change my password for me.
As long as you don't put it in code, and end up, pushing to GitHub, you're okay.
Yeah, I should be fine. So let's take a look at what we can see about this cluster. So we can see there's a number of get Rubrik cluster commands, and we'll go for the get Rubrik cluster info to see what kind of cluster we're working with. It takes a little bit of time, waking the poor cluster up. And the reason this one takes a bit more time is because there's multiple API calls happening in the background in order to populate this one. So you can see that we have one cluster, and there's 4 nodes in this cluster, and it's probably in Santa Clara. I'm not entirely sure. I think it recently moved, but who knows? So the nice thing about PowerShell is that all documentation is also integrated in the commands. So what we can do is we can do help and then the name of the command, and then get some examples, because I always like to start with examples. So you can see get Rubrik name server 1. So it's pretty easy. You can also search by SLA. You can look for unassigned VMs. So this could be a daily job where you check, okay, are there any VMs that are unassigned? Then you can report back on that. And there's some additional options such as detailed object. And with that, we'll get some information about my VM. And we can see that we have 2 VMs with the same name. One is local and the other one is a replicated VM. So I'll just get the local one, and then we can have some fun with it and make some changes there. So once again, I used get command to find the SOA command, and we can see that there's a number. We can get information about the SOAs. We can create new SOAs using new Rubrik SOA. We can also change settings using set. And we can also suspend and resume backup jobs for an entire SOA. So that's something that is quite useful in disaster recovery scenarios, or when you've been targeted by malware and you want to make sure that it doesn't end up in your backups. You can choose to suspend your backups temporarily. So let's get some information about, let's create a new SOA. And I just put delete me there, just to make sure that I will actually delete it, and otherwise Mike can delete it for me if I forget. And I've also used the verbose option. What that gives us is that we can see what kind of commands are being executed, and we can see the full body of the request. You don't have to see this, but if you use the verbose switch, then you can get this information. So you can see it is set with 4 hours. We also set the hourly frequency to 4 hours, so that's all correct. So if we do get Rubrik SOA, we should get this information back again. We already looked for get Rubrik VM. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at what we can do with protect Rubrik VM. And we can see that we can just use the pipeline from get Rubrik VM and then pipe it into protect Rubrik VM. So we're going to assign a new SLA. If we check out what is currently assigned to my VM, you can see that is Unicorn. And now we're going to assign the Textron SLA. So you can see it's quite easy. We can also validate that it has actually done it by running it again. Ooh, it's still pending. Let's see. Well, then we're just going to give it some time to switch over. What are we going to do? Oh, yes. In the next one, I'll show how we can take a snapshot on demand. So we all know that sometimes we do things on our systems that we're not entirely sure if it's going to work as expected, and we might break a production server. And if you're afraid of that, or you have a track record of doing so, probably stop working for the day if that's the case. But you can take an on-demand snapshot, and you can also specify which SLA you want to take that snapshot for. So let's see, it's now correctly switched over, so it's on Textron. So what I'll do for the snapshot, I'll just explicitly tell it to do it on the Unicorn SLA instead of the new one. So you can also assign it to a different SLA, or you can even store it indefinitely, so it will never expire. Those are all options that you have available, and depending on the SLA you assign the snapshot to, that determines the retention of your backup. So with that, of course, doing it for one VM is not that interesting because, well, if we switch over here, we can also do this directly from here. You can just say take on-demand snapshot, and that is about as fast as what we did in the previous example. But what if we decide to do a snapshot for every VM that we have? And let's take a look. We use the measure command again just to see how many VMs we have available. So we have 138 on this cluster. It's not a huge amount. We have customers with tens and tens of thousands. So this is not too much. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign a different SLA, but we specify a what if parameter. And what that will do is it will hopefully, we never know. I might make Mike very upset now by assigning all our workloads to a new SLA.
I don't know why you think you're going to make me upset.
I'll be the one fixing it. I'll be very sad. But it worked as intended. So instead of actually executing the API calls and assigning the new SLAs, we just get a what would happen. This is very useful for the scenarios where you think you understand what the command does, or you think you have the filtering set up the way it's supposed to work. But what if is a nice safeguard that you can use just in case you made a typo, or you have a variable that is not assigned, and then instead of querying for your one VM, it just gets all VMs. What if can be useful in that case. So with that, we can take another look at the SLA. You can see there's only one object being protected, so that's good. That's what we wanted. And we'll take a look at a new command. And this is especially useful when you're trying to figure out which file you want to restore, or if you have malware on the system and you want to clarify what the scope of the infection is. You can do that to the GUI, as Mike showed, but we can also do it directly from the console. So we can see here, we can get a VM, we can find a Rubrik file, and then the search string will give us some information back. So we can either pipe it to get Rubrik VM, or what we can do is we can run it directly with the ID. I'll go for the ID in this example. I should have left the help first. There we go. So we can see that it found a lot of files called desktop INI. So let's take a look at what kind of properties we have available here. So we can see we get the file name, file versions, and the path of the file. So you can see in this case, it's in public account pictures. And if we take a look at file versions, let's see what we get there. So we can see that there's the last modified. We can see the file size. So we can do all kinds of reporting of historic changes to files. And we can use that, or security teams can use this to find out what the scope of the infection is, what kind of files have changed. And it allows you to very quickly and very easily query against many systems at the same time and get this information back. And this actually works so fast that instead of using Windows search or trying to find a file on my system, what I do is I just query the Rubrik endpoint. It has all the metadata available. It's in a super fast database. So if I'm looking for a file on my own system, it's quicker for me to query through Rubrik than to search through my entire hard disk or using the indexing service.
Hey,
yes.
Didn't that command like get created like around the whole log4j
Yes.
exploit? Yeah. Okay.
That's that was the first use case for this one. And with that, I'll go back to the slides and actually make them full screen. There we go. And talking about ransomware, Langs is an Australian building company, and they also got hit by ransomware. And what we deliver there is, it's on the slide, restoring all VMs, 25 minutes, especially when you're scripting or coding it. If we do an in-place restore, it can go really quick. So of course, also depends on what kind of storage the backups are stored upon. It took 1 hour to fully recover, and there was 0 data loss. So that's a really good score. Something that I would always aim for. We also have a ransomware recovery warranty, which means that if you get infected by ransomware while being protected by Rubrik, we provide a warranty for up to 5 million. So that can be quite useful. To this date, we've not had to pay out anything yet, so we're doing quite all right in that aspect. So then the next steps. Rubrik.com is a great place to get started. We write a lot of blog posts there. So if you want to stay up to date what is happening in the world of Rubrik, that's a good one. There's build.rubrik.com. If you want to try If you want to try Rubrik, then we have the Rubrik Explore Labs, so you can play around with everything that we've shown here, and you can find out if it really works the way we say it, because seeing is believing, of course. And I see the question about how to access Slack. I'll throw a link for that in the chat in a minute. And with that, that's the end of the session. If you have any questions, we'll stick around for the next 5 minutes. And Mike, if you have anything to add to this, feel free to jump in.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I don't think any questions are there other than someone looking for the link. Sorry, Yap, I threw it out there that we do have a Slack channel that we discuss automation related stuff in, and someone was just wondering how to get in there. So hopefully everyone can see the power of Rubrik, not only for your data security platform, be it going that extra mile and be able to automate everything as well. So if you go look at all the use cases we have on Rubrik Build, you'll see there's a ton of different things, like being able to integrate data protection and data security into things like CI/CD pipelines, or your CloudFormation templates, or Ansible, Terraform, and self-service stuff. Again, all the ransomware stuff that we went through can also be accomplished by running a Palo Alto Networks Cortex XOR playbook. So we have integration into that as well. So just hopefully everyone can see the value. And if there's any other questions or anything, just reach out for sure.
You're still muted, Cody.
Thank you so much. I'll give the audience about 1 more minute to send in any questions, but quickly I will go ahead and announce our Amazon gift card winners. This is for $25 gift cards. Our first winner is Peter C. Our second winner is Blaze D. Our third winner is JD D. And our fourth and final winner is John K. or Johan K. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see that email, just check your spam folder. I'd also like to remind our audience that this webinar was recorded. You'll receive an email shortly after we conclude with a link to access the on-demand, or you can find it living on the Security Boulevard website. And so I am not seeing any more questions at this point in time. So I would just like to thank Yap and Mike for taking the time to be with us, for putting together their own respective demos and sharing their PowerPoint with everyone. So I appreciate the time that the two of you put into this presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, my pleasure.
I would like to extend our gratitude to Rubrik for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. So we really appreciate you being here with us today. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future TechStrong Learning webinar. This is Cody J. Brown signing off.